Before there was war, before there were kings, before language had even taken shape on the tongue of man, there was Africa. Africa is not just a continent. It is the womb of the earth, the beginning of time itself for us. Every human, every nation, every tribe, every race owes its roots to the red soil of this ancient land, long before pyramids, before borders, before even the idea of civilization. There was a stretch of land along the Great Rift Valley, a fault line in the earth that opened a doorway in history here. Our oldest ancestors walked upright for the very first time. Their footprints are still there, preserved in stone. Fossils that whisper, "We were here." Around 6 to 7 million years ago, a creature known as Sahelanthropus chidensis emerged in Chad, one of the earliest known human-like species. But the real revolution came with a species called Homo habilis, the handyman, the first to craft tools from stone. Cue ambient sound, clinking stone tools. They chipped flint into knives, cracked bones to reach marrow, and began to shape the world around them. This was the beginning, not of man as a body, but man as a mind. In the caves of South Africa, evidence shows our ancestors mastered fire over 1 million years ago, not just for warmth or cooking, but for protection. Fire became the first god, a spirit that danced, lit the darkness, and scared off death. These were not savages, they were scientists in skins, studying stars, seasons, and survival. Africa was thinking long before the rest of the world had even opened its eyes. Around 70,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. Small bands of Homo sapiens, born in East Africa, began to migrate outward, first to North Africa, then to the Middle East, then Europe, Asia, Australia, eventually the Americas. Africa gave birth to humanity, and then humanity left home. But Africa didn't stop evolving. Long before modern science, African tribes spoke of star beings, of ancestral spirits, of the hidden knowledge in the sky. The Dogon people of Mali described the star Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye. Centuries before any telescope could detect it, how did they know? Was it oral wisdom passed for millennia? Was it myth? Or was it something more? Africa holds mysteries older than language, truths buried beneath centuries of silence. The first gods weren't Roman, they weren't Greek, they weren't Middle Eastern. The earliest deities were found in the carvings of Sudan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Egypt, spirits of the sun, rivers, forests, ancestors. These were not stories of domination, but of balance with nature, of giving and receiving, of listening to the land. Africa's earliest spirituality wasn't about punishment, it was about connection. In every African tradition, there is one constant, the mother, not just biologically, but spiritually, politically, cosmically. The earth was the mother, elders were the mother, the village itself was the mother. It's no coincidence that the oldest DNA lineages on earth come from African women. We are all the children of one woman, the mitochondrial Eve, traced back to East Africa 150,000 years ago. Her blood flows in all of us. So the next time someone asks you, "Where are you from?" you can look them in the eye and say, "I am from the beginning," because Africa was the beginning of everything. Before war, before conquest, before empires raised their flags, Africa spoke to the spirits. She spoke in whispers carried by wind, in the rhythm of the drums, in the rustling of trees and the flicker of firelight. The first African civilizations weren't measured in buildings, they were measured in connection between man and the unseen. In ancient Africa, everything was alive. Every tree had a voice, every river had a name, every ancestor still walked among the living. This wasn't religion, it was a way of life, one that saw no division between the spiritual and the physical. The land wasn't owned, it was respected. Elders weren't old, they were oracles. And life wasn't linear, it was a circle. Deep in the forests of Senegal and the Gambia stand thousands of laterite stone circles, still upright after 1,500 years. A place now called Wasu. Who built them? What were they aligned to? The stars, the ancestors, the gods. Archaeologists still argue, but the locals say they know. This is where the earth listens. Far before the pyramids of Egypt, Africa had her own Stonehenge. In Mali, among cliffs and dust and silence, lives the Dogon tribe, isolated, rooted, ancient. For centuries, they passed down a tale of a tiny invisible star that orbited Sirius, a star science would not discover until the 1970s. They called it Potolo. They described its density, weight, orbit, without telescopes. How? Some say aliens. Some say coincidence. But maybe it was ancestral memory. Knowledge whispered through bloodlines. In the forests of West Africa, the Dahomey kingdom once trained women, warriors and divine priestesses known as the Minnow. They worshipped the python spirit, Dan, and believed snakes connected the earth and heavens, not as evil, but as bridges between worlds. Their temples still stand in Ouidah, Benin, a place where offerings are left in clay pots and silence is respected. To them, divinity was not distant. It was in the air, the soil, the breath. In ancient Ife and Igbo lands, the people practiced divination through cowrie shells, palm nuts, and sacred writing systems. The Ifa divination system, led by Babalaos, told the future through chants and binary patterns, long before computers would mimic them. In the Congo, the Bakongo people traced destines using the Dikenga, a sacred cross that charted birth, life, death, and rebirth. These weren't just symbols. They were maps of the soul. Africa did not wait for colonizers to bring religion. It had prophets of its own, seers, dreamwalkers, trance dancers. In Ethiopia, legends tell of the Queen of Sheba who spoke with the wind. In Sudan, Amun priests entered trances beneath the stars. Across Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, elders used Eketu Bero, a spiritual bowl, to speak with the dead. Africa's priests didn't wear gold crowns. They wore earth. They walked barefoot because the ground spoke louder than scrolls. To this day, in Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Congo, the old ways live. They live behind churches, behind mosques, in silence, in shrines, in stories. The ancestors are still called upon, sacrifices still made, names still whispered before dawn. Africa never truly forgot. She simply went quiet. Before Africa had empires, she had memory. Before she had rulers, she had rituals. Before she built walls, she built worlds within the soul. These ancient ways are not dead. They're simply waiting to be remembered. Long before Europe knew how to build stone, before China raised its first wall, before the name Egypt was ever written in Latin, Africa had already built kingdoms of fire and gold. This is the story they tried to erase. The story of African kings who wore leopard skin and queens who ruled with swords and stars. In the sands of what is now Sudan, along the Nile River, rose a civilization older than ancient Egypt. It was called Nubia. They built pyramids more than Egypt. They mastered iron, stonework, and commerce. They spoke in gods, traded in ivory, gold, incense, and they were black, proudly black. But history would later paint them as others, when in truth they were the source. Out of Nubia rose the mighty kingdom of Kush, and from Kush came a power so great, it conquered Egypt itself. In the 8th century BCE, a warrior king named Pi led an army north. He didn't loot Egypt, he protected it, restored temples, honored the gods, and declared himself pharaoh. For nearly 100 years, the 25th dynasty of Egypt was ruled by African kings from Kush, known as the Black Pharaohs. You won't see their faces in most Western museums, but in Sudan, their pyramids still rise from red sand, forgotten but never gone. Eastward, in the highlands of Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, rose a kingdom that would claim divine ancestry, the kingdom of Aksum. Its rulers said they descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. They carved churches into mountains, minted coins in gold and silver, and housed, some say, the Ark of the Covenant, hidden in a chapel in Aksum, guarded to this day. No outsider is allowed to see it, but the guardian, a single chosen monk, never leaves its side. Ethiopia never bowed to colonizers. It remains the only African nation never fully conquered. That is not by accident. It is by design. Let us speak plainly. Ancient Egypt was African. Its earliest dynasties rose from the south, from the Upper Nile, near Nubia and Kush. The skin of the pharaohs, dark. Their gods, formed in the images of black men and women. The oldest name for Egypt was Kemet, the Black Land, not just for soil, but for the people. Egypt was not a miracle of Europe. It was the legacy of Africa, a legacy stolen, then rebranded, then rewritten, but the truth is not buried. It was just hidden. You've heard of Cleopatra, but do you know Amanirenas? She was a blind queen of Kush who led her army against the Roman Empire. Rome demanded tribute. Amanirenas answered with war. Her forces invaded Roman Egypt, destroyed their statues, and returned with trophies. Even the Romans recorded her as a woman of unmatched courage. She is not a myth. She is history, and she is African. From the massive ruins of Great Zimbabwe in the south, to the carved city of Lalibela in the east, and the ancient cities of Kerma, Napata, and Meru along the Nile, Africa's kingdoms were not small villages in the forest. They were cities of kings, builders of trade networks, writers of script, keepers of knowledge. They had systems of law, armies, diplomacy, philosophy, thousands of years before Europe knew its own name. Africa is not a child of history. She is the mother of it. Her kingdoms rose with the sun and taught the world how to build, to rule, to believe. They want you to think Africa had no past, because if you knew the truth, you would understand your power. But now, you remember. The West told you Africa was primitive, but history tells another story. A story of gold, cities, kings, universities, and a man so wealthy, he broke the economies of nations just by passing through. This is the true golden age of Africa, a time when the world came to learn from Africa and returned home with books, riches, and awe. Around 300 AD, in the heart of West Africa, rose the mighty empire of Ghana, also called Wagadu. It was not the Ghana we know today, but an empire that covered Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, and more. It stood at the edge of the Sahara, and in its soil lay gold, so much that they didn't value it above salt. Ghana was called the Land of Gold. Its capital, Kambi Saleh, had over 20,000 people. Stone buildings, markets, and Muslim scholars from North Africa. Arab writers who visited said, "In Ghana, justice is swift, and the king is the wealthiest man alive." Ghana thrived for 600 years, until it was overtaken by a rising star. In the 13th century, the mantle passed to Mali, a nation that would shape history like none before it. It was founded by the legendary Sundiata Keita, the Lion King, a disabled boy who rose from exile to unite 12 kingdoms under one banner. His story would inspire the Disney film generations later. But in real life, Sundiata's kingdom stretched from the Atlantic to Nigeria. He established laws that would last for 100 years, and declared, "The world is old, but the future springs from the past." Then came his grandson, the man who would shock the world, Mansa Musa. In 1324, Musa made the Great Hajj to Mecca, a journey of 4,000 miles across deserts, cities, and kingdoms. He brought with him 80 camels, each carrying over 100 kilograms of gold, and 60,000 men, including 12,000 slaves dressed in fine silk. In Cairo, his generosity was so vast, he caused a gold inflation crisis that took 12 years to recover. Musa wasn't just wealthy, he was a builder. He made Timbuktu a center of learning, commerce, and architecture. He built mosques, libraries, universities. While Europe was still in the Dark Ages, Africa was shining. You've heard of Oxford, you've heard of Cambridge, but do you know Timbuktu? In the 14th century, Timbuktu had over 180 schools, 25,000 students, the Sankar University with thousands of manuscripts, scholars in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, and philosophy. Books were so valuable, they were traded for gold by weight. Visitors from Arabia and Europe came to study and returned humbled. Timbuktu was Africa's gift to global knowledge. As Mali declined, another giant rose, Songhai, centered in Gao and Timbuktu. The Songhai Empire under Sunni, Ali and Askia Muhammad, became the largest empire in African history. Sunni Ali was a brilliant general, feared, respected, and undefeated. Askia Muhammad brought religious reform and expanded trade routes. Songhai controlled salt mines, gold fields, and trade networks from the Sahara to the Atlantic. It was a state of law, of tax systems, of ambassadors, a superpower in every sense, until 1591, when Moroccan invaders with guns disrupted centuries of peace with a single blow. Yet even in defeat, the legacy remained. Southward, beyond the savannah and into the high plateaus of today's Zimbabwe, rose a city so grand, Europeans refused to believe Africans built it. It was called Great Zimbabwe. It had stone walls 36 feet high, built without mortar, still standing today. It held 18,000 people, with royal palaces, towers, and trade connections as far as China. They traded in gold, ivory, glass, beads, and ceramics. Arab traders left records of its power. Chinese porcelain was found in its ruins. But when Europeans saw the site, they said, Africans couldn't have built this. And so they erased it from their textbooks. But the stone remained. So the next time they ask you, what did Africa ever contribute to the world? You tell them, Africa taught it how to rule. Africa taught it how to learn. Africa taught it how to trade, to write, to build. The golden age of Africa is not just history. It is proof that Africa was never behind. It was simply hidden. They said Africa was mystical, but not logical. They said Africa sang, but didn't think, that it danced, but didn't invent. But they never told you about the tools, the bronze, the scalpel, the stars. This is not mythology. This is African science, ancient, advanced, and undeniable. In what is now Nigeria, around 1000 BC, a mysterious people began forging tools from iron. Centuries before Europe or Asia, they were called the Nok. They left behind life like terracotta sculptures, iron tools, furnaces. They were farming, smelting, and sculpting at the dawn of recorded history. Archaeologists don't know where they came from, or why they vanished, but what they left behind rewrites timelines. African medicine was not superstition. It was science wrapped in spirituality. In Baganda, Uganda, ancient surgeons were removing cataracts, setting bones, and stitching wounds using antiseptics made from plants. In ancient Kemet, Egypt, papyrus scrolls describe brain surgery, dental work, tumor removal, use of honey, copper, and willow bark natural aspirin. African doctors knew how to isolate pain, stop infection, and treat mental illness. Long before modern hospitals, in the Kingdom of Congo, laws and therapy were intertwined. Confession was not just spiritual, it was psychological. In Mali, scholars in Timbuktu debated time, soul, metaphysics. They had classifications for the mind, emotion, and moral behavior. In Ghana, griots, oral historians, used memory systems and mnemonic devices as accurate as written history. The African mind was never empty. It was simply spoken, not printed. Look up at the African sky, and you'll see the same stars our ancestors mapped by firelight. In Mali, the Dogon tribe described the orbit of Sirius B, the rotation of planets, a knowledge of celestial events long before telescopes. In Egypt, temples were aligned with solstices and equinoxes. The temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak was a solar calendar in stone. In southern Africa, stone observatories marked the path of the sun and seasons, vital for farming, hunting, and ritual. In the Kingdom of Benin, around the 13th century, artists created metal work so advanced, European scholars couldn't believe they came from Africa. The Benin bronzes, cast with the lost wax method, showed kings, warriors, gods, and daily life in stunning detail. Their precision rivaled the art of Renaissance Italy. When the British invaded in 1897, they stole over 4,000 bronzes, now housed in museums across Europe. Today, the world is finally being forced to return them. African blacksmiths were more than metal workers. They were alchemists. In Mali and the Congo, iron was smelted in clay furnaces using forced air technology. In Zimbabwe, gold was purified. In Ethiopia, tannins and dyes were created for trade. African metallurgy wasn't just industry. It was spiritual, sacred, passed from father to son like a bloodline. They said Africa didn't invent, but we lit fire from stone. We mapped the stars. We forged iron with spirit and science. We healed. We studied. We taught the world in silence. They buried our knowledge, but now we dig it up. After centuries of gold, glory, and greatness, Africa was not conquered by war alone. She was conquered by strategy, by lies, by the most violent weapon of all, division. The age of colonization wasn't about civilization, it was about control. And to break Africa, they had to break her memory. In 1884, in Berlin, 14 European nations gathered around a table. Not a single African was invited. They took a map of Africa and cut it like cake. France took the west, Britain took the south and east, Belgium took the heart. They didn't ask, they didn't negotiate, they simply drew borders, ignoring tribes, languages, rivers, mountains, and gods. Over 10,000 years of African unity was shattered in 6 weeks. But the theft began long before Berlin. From the 1500s to the 1800s, over 12 million Africans were stolen across the Atlantic, chained, branded, sold like animals. Kingdoms were bribed to sell their enemies. Others were raided in the night. Boys were taken from rivers, girls from dance ceremonies, priests, blacksmiths, farmers, gone. For every slave that reached the Americas, at least 5 died in transit. Africa lost her strongest minds, her future leaders, her daughters and sons. They didn't just take people. They took language. They took names. They took belief. African children were forced to forget their gods and bow to foreign ones. Their tongues were replaced with English, French, Portuguese, Spanish. Their skin was called cursed. Their hair, unclean. Their culture, savage. Entire tribes were taught to hate themselves and praise the very flags that enslaved them. Mental slavery lasted long after the chains were gone. Colonizers took more than people. They took rubber from Congo, gold from Ghana, diamonds from South Africa, oil from Nigeria, ivory from Kenya, land from Zimbabwe. They taxed the poor, banned native languages, replaced sacred groves with cash crops, called resistance terrorism, and called submission progress. Africa was not poor. She was robbed. But Africa did not kneel forever. There were revolts. There were warriors. Yasanta Wavgana picked up a gun to defend her kingdom. Samori Tur fought the French with strategy and strength. Dedan Kimathi led Kenya's Mau Mau rebellion from the forest. Queen Inga of Angola negotiated, fought, and outsmarted Portuguese generals for 30 years. They don't tell you about these heroes, because you might start looking in the mirror and seeing one too. By the mid-1900s, most African countries gained independence, on paper, but colonization left deep wounds. Borders that split brothers, tribes that no longer trusted each other, education systems that erased African thought, religions that demonized African identity, media that portrayed the motherland as broken, poor, violent. A war had ended, but the damage remained. They stole our land, they stole our names, but they could never steal our spirit. And now, the memory is rising again. Africa is waking up. The world is watching, and history is being rewritten. They thought we would stay broken, but Africa is not just the story of pain. Africa is the story of rebirth. After every scar, we rose. After every silence, we sang. This is not the end of Africa's story. This is the beginning of her return. From the 1900s onward, a new fire began to burn, not just in Africa, but in the hearts of its children across the world. Pan-Africanism rose as an idea that all people of African descent, from Nigeria to Jamaica, Harlem to Accra, are one people, one destiny. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Patrice Lumumba of Congo, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, Marcus Garvey of Jamaica, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela. They carried one dream: Black unity, Black freedom, Black future. While bullets silenced revolutions, music kept the fire alive. From Lagos came the thunder of Afrobeat, Fela Kuti, screaming truth over drums and saxophones. In South Africa, Mboob and Kwaito moved in rhythm with the fight against apartheid. In the US, hip-hop became the voice of the voiceless. It was African storytelling, reborn in concrete jungles. Across the Caribbean, in Brazil, in Paris, in London, the beat of the drum never died. It simply evolved. Today, the world dances to Afrobeats, wears African prints on fashion runways, imitates hairstyles once mocked, speaks in slang once silenced. Wakanda is fiction, but the pride it stirred is real. African culture is no longer hiding, it's leading. From Burna Boy to Thames, from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie to Lupita Nyong'o, from Black Panther to the Woman King. The world is no longer ignoring Africa. The world is watching it. Across the globe, Black scholars, creators, and thinkers are asking, what if Africa's story was never truly told? Museums are being forced to return stolen artifacts. Languages once forbidden are being taught in schools. Ancient scrolls in Timbuktu are being digitized. African spirituality is no longer shamed, it is studied. Young Africans are saying, we are not the children of slaves. We are the descendants of survivors, builders, and kings. Yes, Africa still battles poverty, corruption, conflict. But behind the headlines, something is growing. Tech hubs in Kenya and Nigeria, fashion empires in Ghana, renewable energy projects in Ethiopia, African startups attracting global investment, young minds refusing to leave, choosing to build. This is not the Africa they show on the news. This is the real Africa. Young, driven, awake. Africa has seen centuries of glory and centuries of grief, but she is not finished. She is rising through rhythm, through resistance, through remembrance. The world may have tried to erase her story, but now she's writing it herself. This is the African Renaissance, and it has just begun. Africa is not just a place. She is a spirit. She lives in every drumbeat, in every braided strand, in every rhythm and revolution. They tried to bury her beneath ruins and lies. But you cannot bury a mother. You cannot erase a river. Africa was never silent. She was silenced. But now the silence is breaking. From the streets of Lagos to the corners of London, from Soweto to Chicago, a voice is rising. It is the voice of memory, of pride, of truth. You are not the descendant of slaves. You are the child of survivors, of builders, of scholars, of gods and queens and kings. The pyramids carry your fingerprints. The bronze carries your legacy. The rhythm in your chest is not just a beat. It is ancestral thunder. So when they ask you, what has Africa given the world? You say, life, civilization, mathematics, music, medicine, spirit, soul. Africa gave the world its first breath, and now she is breathing again. This is not just a documentary. This is a reminder that you are not lost, that your history is not behind you. It is inside you. You are Africa, and Africa is rising.